Why do you need, in a place as august as Harvard, a council on academic freedom?
Academic freedom is under attack. It is under attack from sometimes by groups of student activists who believe that certain opinions are beyond the pale or and must be repressed. It's under attack by certain layers of the academic bureaucracy, layers that have been growing that often have no particular commitment to the pursuit and transmission of knowledge, but are mandated to enforce what are euphemistically called diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, and are all too happy to sanction or libel or punish a student or a faculty member or a fellow for expressing some opinion deemed to be beyond the pale.
So I guess the question is, if you're going to establish something like this, you talked about the general problem. Are there specific examples that nag in your mind? Is there an example of someone being cancelled, some academic figure being silenced, where the consensus has tried to say, we're not interested in your opinions? Is there an example that you can give us that crystallizes the need of it?
Oh, sure. I can give you three. There's a associate of mine, Carol Hooven, a human biologist, wrote a best-selling book on testosterone. She said in an interview to publicizing the book that biologically speaking, there are two sexes. This is a true statement, but she was humiliated and tarred as a transphobe. Students boycotted her courses, including teaching assistants. There was a Harvard law student a couple of years ago who said in a private email with other students that she thought that issues of racial differences were empirical questions. They couldn't be decided from the armchair, but should be at least be entertained. One of the students had a vendetta against her. I think a dispute over a boyfriend. Publicized the email. The dean of the law school denounced the student as a racist and forced her into a cringing apology with career damage. Then another colleague of mine in a different school within Harvard was a number of years ago signed on to an amicus brief, that is a friend of the court brief in the Supreme Court case deciding gay marriage, where he joined with 60 other academics arguing against gay marriage, and there were calls for him to resign and boycotts. There was another faculty dean a law school professor, who was on the defense team of what's his name, Harvey
Weinstein.
Weinstein, yes, and was forced to step down as residential dean because he was defending a bad man, even though, according to our Constitution, bad men have the right to be to legal counsel during their trials. Those are four examples off the top of my head.
Is it therefore this will be perceived then as a worry that it's the left wing, it's the left of society cancelling the right, and therefore you're effectively mounting the position of defending the right? Are you comfortable being couched in those terms?
No, I actively resist it, and so have my colleagues on the Council on Academic Freedom, and a number of us are on the left, a number of us are on the right. It is true that at least on campuses, most of the repression attempts have come from the left, but there also have been attempts in the United States at present of right-wing politicians to try to ban books from school libraries. And historically, probably, I would guess, it's hard to count, but there have been plenty of attempts to repress the left, the most famous of which being the McCarthy era and Red Scare in the United States, but in the United States and Britain during World War I, it was the pacifists who were often jailed or fired for opposing the participation in World War I.
But in the modern world, it feels like, but maybe do we not accept that students generally tend left? They tend towards liberal opinions. The reality of their views are this. Many students have a view about race, about gender, that is what it is. Are you fighting almost sort of Canute-like against something you can't actually resist? They're the people at the minute. That's the consensus, particularly among students, and that's just life. Students have always swung left a bit, and that they might grow out of it, but they might not. But that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Well, I think that is a part of our reality, and in a couple of decades, I'll be dead, and I'll be replaced by people born later who have different sensibilities. As my sensibilities different from my parents, so there is that generational trend. But it is I my generation was talked out of some of the silliness that we subscribed to in the 1970s, such as that Mao was a hero and that Maoist China was a utopia. um, we had we had plenty of daffy beliefs that we did outgrow or were persuaded out of. Maybe not all of us, and in fact, probably those who weren't are now deans and provosts of many universities, sadly. But many of us were, and also whenever there is repression of speech, the problem is you can't tell because so many people are intimidated
Yeah.
that you don't even know if they might even be in a majority, but each one of them is afraid to speak up and perhaps even mistakenly believes that they're the only one. They're thinking to themselves, am I crazy or is the world crazy? Maybe I'm crazy. And once you have people speaking up on their behalf, they realize, oh, I'm not crazy.
Do you think
And
this is a
there
problem
is
across?
a substantial minority, maybe a majority of students who aren't the most outspoken, but who are fed up at being told what they can think and what they can't think.
I might feel that they're being silenced as well. Is this a problem? I mean, you're talking about Harvard, which is obviously a very specific American university. You'll be familiar with Britain. I presume that you're doing this, but can sense that this is a problem that isn't just confined to Harvard, isn't just confined to Ivy League universities in America. It's actually a problem that you could imagine happening in Britain. Do you
Oh, I
perceive
don't
it
have
in Britain?
I don't have to imagine it. I've read about it. Yes.
Yeah. So, what's the solution to this? I mean, what can this mean? Is this just a bunch of high-minded people sitting around a table, or can you actually affect change?
Well, we hope we can affect change, and we do hope that Harvard's just one university, and Harvard thinks a lot of itself, often undeservedly so. But nonetheless, Harvard is a brand. It is perhaps the world's most famous university, certainly one of them. And we do hope that what we're doing will
Steady.
spew outside our walls. Well, no, you can argue for the Red for Oxford and Cambridge, but fine, we're up there.
Okay.
Um, but we don't hope just to be kind of a support group for targets of cancellation, and not just educators trying to spread the word about the benefits of academic freedom and free speech. But universities do have commitments to free speech. Some in the United States, the state universities are branches of the government, and they are bound by the First Amendment. The government may not restrict speech. Even for private universities such as Harvard, there are faculty policies, there are handbooks, there are statements that are announced that we can use to try to hold their feet to the fire and say, well, look, the university is publicly committed to academic freedom. By this action, you are engaged in false advertising. And we're going to hold you to policies that are there on the books. You might forget about those policies, but they're there.
That's a good point. Do you think you, Steven Pinker, a world-renowned writer and thinker, are you too big to cancel? Can you wade into this because ultimately you've built up some credibility, some collateral, some success, and actually that you're well positioned to fight this because you're almost too big to cancel? Or do you wake up every day thinking, God, I could say the wrong thing in a lecture or on Times Radio now, and someone could come after me?
Oh, no one's too big to cancel. And no, I don't think that. I do appreciate my privilege of having tenure and a hard money salary at a brand name university, but no one's too big to cancel. I mean, just to give an example, James Watson, one of the greatest scientists in the history of our species, was canceled for some admittedly stupid remarks that he made about Africa. But you can make stupid remarks, and they're no longer just blown off as a Nobel Prize winner bloviating, overconfident with all the adulation that he's received. But it could end a career. Names could be stripped off buildings and fellowships, and interviews and writing opportunities can dry up. So it can happen to anyone. I mean, it won't happen. I don't think it'll happen to me because I won't say stupid things like Watson did, and I don't believe those things. But yeah, it could happen.
But if your point is that it's not a stupid thing, I mean, maybe you saying it's a biologically true statement that there are two sexes. That is a piece of biological fact. Some people
Yes,
don't.
that's right.
So,
Unlike Carol Hooven, my position is much more secure. She wasn't literally fired; she resigned, and I won't be fired. But I mean, I still have a risk if all of the graduate students at Harvard University refused to be teaching assistants in my courses. That would really, really suck.
even if you
So
and if they said that's because you said there are only two biological sexes, you'd still feel you have to say that though.
yeah, there is. So yes, I am incurring a risk. Yes.
It's not a risk that you'll duck. You will still say if the question gets asked, such as it matters, there are two biological sexes, and that's what I think.
Too late now. I just did.
Yeah, very, very true. What about I suppose finally, Stephen? What about the argument? I suppose that these things are pendulums, and the idea of sort of authority is going to be challenged. And actually, in some ways, the powerful have always owned the discourse, and they've owned the discourse for generations and generations. We are seeing the less powerful seeking control of the discourse, and maybe this is going too far in the other direction. People are scared to offer an opinion. The consensus itself unhealthy on the other side. But that's how dialectically you get to a good position. That there was once too much authority. You then have challenged the authority, and therefore a weird consensus on the other side. And actually, the healthy position is in 5 years' time when we reach a happy middle position. Is that naive to think that might be where we get to?
Yeah, well, authority should be challenged. That is a good thing, but it is not the case that application of muscle to repress speech via firings, via censorship, has led to social progress. Quite the contrary. Many advances like the enfranchisement of women, the abolition of slavery, the legal equality for gay people, the civil rights movement in the United States flourished in an environment of free speech, and it was often they themselves were targets of censorship and intimidation and punishment. And in societies like, of course, the Soviet Union, modern China, Nazi Germany, that imprisoned or killed people who challenged their authority. So, in general, anyone ought to be able to challenge authority, but anyone should be able to express their opinions either way. And often the people who have been targeted now are not those in authority. They're people like Carol Hooven, who is relatively powerless and has been driven out of a scientific career. It's often the weak who are being hounded and repressed.
And actually, talking about authoritarian states, you don't think it's going too far to even bring them into the conversation? The idea of an enforced consensus is an authoritarian act. That's the beginnings of which you're seeing here.
Not at all. And in fact, some of the developments on university campuses and in corporations are all too reminiscent of Maoist China, such as re-education sessions, struggle sessions, where people are, as a kind of ostensibly as a form of education, are held up to kind of public humiliation and socially pressured into cringing apologies as a technique of enforcement of opinion that falls short of actually throwing someone into jail, but since we are social creatures, could be equally effective.
Yeah. So the fight back starts now.
Well, I hope so, and I think there is one of the consequences of repression of opinion is you just don't know how many people hold the opinion, because that's the whole point. They're being shut up, they're being intimidated, power is being applied to censor them, and often by breaking the dam of repression, you find that certain opinions are much more popular than you might have thought.
Yeah, I think we have this conversation quite often on this program. Stephen, what a privilege to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.